Oh, one of our most beautiful songs that we do here. So I invite each one of us to take a few deep, conscious, healing breaths. If it feels comfortable for you to touch your own heart and say, "Come away, my beloved." Just touch your own heart. Whisper to yourself, "Come away, my beloved." I invite each one of us to close our eyes if that feels comfortable. And we let ourselves enter into conversation with this aspect of who we are, known by many names. We enter into conversation with our own heart wisdom, with the one presence. We enter into conversation with the Most High God, the Holy Spirit, the kingdom of heaven, the divine mind, the Atman, the all that is, the center of all being. We enter into conversation. We surrender our time, our energy. We surrender ourselves to be in conversation with the creative presence. We enter into this place to know who we are, what is ours to do, and most importantly, what is ours to be. We use the word beloved so much. We enter into this place to know the beloved and to be loved and to be the presence of love. To know the next right steps. To know the next most appropriate response, action, and decision. Sometimes it changes moment by moment, and we are called to enter into this presence, this place, this conversation, moment by moment by moment. Come away, my beloved. Sit with me for a while. And so as we take a few moments of silence, we let our minds swim in the creative energy of our hearts. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. So this morning we are meeting in this field. And into this consciousness, into this reservoir of healing energy, we speak out the names of those that we're holding in prayer. I invite you to do that now. We hold in prayer all world leaders, all nations, communities. We hold in prayer all world leaders and our government leaders. And we continue to know that our human family has us the capacity to make our decisions for a world that works for all. We continue to let our voices and our words and our thoughts, our energy and our decisions and our responses come forth from the most high consciousness and centered consciousness and wisdom consciousness within us. Let there be peace. Let it begin with us. And we say, so it is, and so we let it be. Namaste. Now watch what happens. The light always returns. Please turn to somebody and say, I'm so glad you're here today. You make a difference. I'm so glad you're here today. You make a difference. I'm so glad you're here. When this sign comes out of the movie theater, we all pretty much get silent. It doesn't work.
Sorry.
And let me tell you what I sense is happening in my life. I'm wondering if it's happening in yours too. And that is, I keep getting these constant messages in many, many ways. Silence. The messages come in so many different ways. Pause. Just be still a moment. Just let your mind rest for a second or two. Just take a deep, conscious, healing breath and let your mind take a moment. And this is no longer a cute little joke. It's the truth of what we're doing. We've got our cell phones and our Starbucks coffee, and we are holding in our consciousness the most high unfoldment of the awakening all at the same time.
Amen.
Here's what some of us are seeing in our lives, however. We may be sitting cross-legged in the meditation pose, but we're not giving ourselves over to silence enough. And so this is a little reminder call for me, and if you don't hear a word I'm saying, that's okay, because this is all from me. To remind myself that I can let myself get worked into a dither. Is that what we say? We get a conniption fit, a hissy fit. Those are more accurate professional terms. I can let myself get worked up of how awful things are. I really can. I can go into the abyss. I have a map to the abyss. I'm just confessing to you right now. So I am constantly getting called by Spirit. Take a moment of silence and stop scaring yourself to death. That was for me. Now, if y'all want to take any of that for yourself, then please do that. So what do we think of when we hear the word silence or see the word silence? What does that mean? What?
Stillness in the mind. In the mind.
Be still.
Peace.
Peace. Quiet. Quiet.
Letting the other side win.
Breathe.
What?
Letting the other side win.
Letting the other side win?
Yes. Silence is golden.
Silence is golden. I know that one well. I had to write it over and over in 10th grade because I talked too much. You cannot imagine that I would talk so much. And his name was Mr. Stanley. And in World War II, his hearing was damaged from the bombs, and so he really did want us to be silent. He didn't want a lot of hoopla in class. And I learned how to write with 5 or 6 pencils at one time. Silence is golden. I had to write a lot. Why is silence golden? What?
It allows us to connect with the Christ within.
Allows us to connect with the Christ. We can hear you.
It's the moment between the notes. If the notes were all jumbled up together, it would be a cacophony we couldn't hear. It's the silence that makes the notes so brilliantly.
The silence that makes the notes move brilliantly. We can hear better when there's some space of silence.
It's
Now, there's some
golden
other-
because it's precious.
Say again?
It's golden because it's precious.
It's golden because it's precious. Some of us are reading Stephen Levine's book in our book group. And I'm going to keep telling this story till all of us hear it. And that is, Stephen was in the hospital room of a family who had invited him there. And he didn't know the man who was in his dying time in the hospital bed. But he went and he complied with the request of the family. He sat in the back of the hospital room. And you know how sometimes when you're in the hospital, people show up who you haven't seen in a decade? And so there was a family reunion going on in this man's hospital room while he's trying to die. You know, and they're talking over him and telling each other stories, and he's just laying there trying to die. And suddenly he points at Stephen Levine, who's sitting in the back of the room. He says, "Everybody quiet, I want to hear what he's saying." Stephen Levine was being absolutely silent. He was holding a space of energy. He was holding a space for this sacred moment to be allowed to happen for this beloved who's laying in the bed, wanting to make that spiritual connection, but over his bed is going on a conversation that has everything to do with everything else except this was his sacred moment for his soul to be released from that body. And so I want to hear what he's saying in the back, the silent one. Think about what you and I are saying all the time with our thoughts. Thank you, honey. Y'all, I want y'all to know that this, I'm so glad for my husband who went with us to the march yesterday with the women's march. So what are we saying nonstop with our thoughts, our energy, our presence? Even before we speak with words, even before we make a decision, what are we saying already with our presence, our thoughts, our energy? What is it that grows out of the silence in you? And if there's not enough silence, I have water if you need. If there's not enough silence within us, then our actions grow out of something else other than the wisdom and the one presence and the highest consciousness that we can know. It's not a hard thing to think about. It is tricky to do it. How many of us have had in the last several months our words come out of a place of fear, anxiety, frustration? Our words, our energy. So this is the best time ever to be alive and practice all of the great spiritual truths that we've been practicing for eons. Really, don't you see it? Don't you think that that's true? Don't you feel like you've been in training for eons? And this is the moment? What if this is the Olympics of spiritual awareness? What if this is the Olympics time for awakening? What if that's true?
Well, you get a gold medal, Margaret.
Yes. Have you ever known an Olympic athlete or a professional dancer? I mean, they practice all the time. They practice all the time. Olympic athletes are always practicing. Did we think it was going to be any different from the awakening of our spiritual consciousness?
Yes.
You did? You thought it was, gosh, it's supposed to be easier. Okay, so let's move on. So, in many indigenous traditions, it is understood that the mysterious space, this is what Preston was just talking about, the mysterious space between things holds the power of new possibilities.
Amen.
We're in a mysterious space right now in the whole world. It's not just our country. It's a mysterious space. We're traversing through a land of unknown. We haven't quite been this way before. We haven't quite passed this way before. It's a new part of the forest, new part of our consciousness that we're calling for. So, in this book, Resilience from the Heart, and Deb has it down in the bookstore for those of you who are going to do the class, Greg Braden says this, in the chapter we're going to start with, Spread the Word. We're not going chapter 1, chapter 2, bunch of troublemakers. We're going to start with the chapter on the good news. So here's what Greg Braden says. It is fair to say that the greatest crises of our time, of extremes, beyond the crises of politics, race, relations, debt, energy, food and water, environment, beyond all those crises is the crisis of thinking. It's our thinking that would make the following solutions we already have a priority in our daily lives. In other words, he's saying, for all the problematic issues we have in the world, we already have the solutions. But in our thinking, we haven't made the solutions priorities. It's our thinking that would make the life-saving solutions we already have a priority in our daily lives and motivate us to implement those solutions in the world. The thinking we need would come from a deep-seated desire, and here it is, here's a clincher, deep-seated desire to contribute to the world rather than from a sense of scarcity and taking from the world. And from cooperating with one another rather than competing against one another. Let's all take a deep breath. So he's asking us to think about these ideas. That part of the awakening, and in the awakening comes a deep desire to make a difference in the world and contribute to the whole, W-H-O-L-E, contribute to the wholeness of who we are, rather than competing and trying to take from one another. Now I know we're moving on a slippery slope. Where is it y'all live, Joe and Jenny? Slippery rock. Kind of on a slippery rock with this stuff. So we're talking about cooperation rather than competition. We're being called to another place. Charles Fillmore, he was looking at this stuff over 100 years ago. And he wanted to move beyond the contradictions and the paradoxes of what he was seeing and reading about. So his solution founded a whole movement. Myrtle brought in the healing aspect, and he brought in the silence. He said we've got to spend more time with what he called headquarters. We've got to go to headquarters more often. Now you can call that going into prayer, you can call it going into meditation, you can call it going into silence. He was simply saying, we can't figure it all out in our present thinking. We've got to go to another way of thinking and feeling to know how to find the solutions to the dilemmas of our world. He said this, and I love this, if I am spirit, and this God they talk so much about is spirit, we can somehow communicate, or the whole thing is a fraud.
Amen.
If we can't touch in to the creative presence that created us, then the whole thing's a fraud. And if it's a fraud, we're going to disappear any second. Let's all take a deep breath. See, some of us are still debating whether or not it's true that we are one with the one presence. Some of us don't really believe that yet, or see that, or feel it. It goes beyond belief. It's once you get it, you get it. We are one with each other, and we are one with the one present. The other thing a lot of us are still debating and resisting is that we're called to do all the things Jesus did and greater. And the other thing we're resisting is we're the light of the world.
Amen.
No, I don't feel like the light today. Let somebody else do that. Let somebody else step up and do that. I need to go back under the covers. Somebody else will be the light of the world again. Guess what happens? The light shines under the covers. It won't let you go back to sleep. Once you get just a little bit of it, it won't let you go back to sleep. Say, hello, under the covers. You remember you're the light of the world. So last Sunday, some of us went to the AMA Martin Luther King service over at Mount Olive. AME. Did I say AMA?
American Motorcycle
The AME Church, Mount Olive, for the Martin Luther King service. And Julia Ingham, is that her name?
Judith Upham.
Judith Upham,
The initials.
92 years of age. Judith Upham marched with Martin Luther King across the Pettus Bridge. She was, her presence was like, whoa. And she just spoke briefly at the AME church, and she just stood up and said, there's a lot to do, so get with it.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah. Push up your sleeves and get with it. So, what Charles said is, the part of the getting with it is to spend enough time with your own heart wisdom so that when you do have action and response in the world, that it comes from the most balanced, centered place that you're capable of in that moment. That's all it is. Some of you hear the word meditation and think it's a prescription for a bad-tasting drug. You say, oh, they're going to make me take this if I go to that church. You don't have to drink any Kool-Aid. Just have some time in the silence. For God's sake. So many people who hate meditation say, we came out of the silence. How can you hate meditation? That's where we have come forth from. Okay. I'm starting to preach. So then, Meher Baba, who he established this place for silence back in the 40s. Where?
Myrtle Beach,
Myrtle
baby.
Beach. Why did he do that? He knew we were going to need it. I saw Jackie. There's only 3 Meher Baba centers in the world, right? Santa Barbara, India, and here.
Well, there's also Australia.
Australia. We're one of 4. What was he thinking? When Mr. Chapin of Burroughs and Chapin said, here, take this land. And the real estate folks have been trying to get their hands on it ever since, right? But Meher Baba knew there's going to come a time, and he knew it in the mid-40s when things were not as loud as they are now. They're going to need a place for silence. They're going to need a place to go and be still. They're going to be needing to remember that silence is the place, the heart is the place where we have conversation and relationship with the one presence. That's simply all it is. Sometimes on Wednesday night, we're here meditating. We are in the bliss. And then the motorcycles come to the alley. You know, or the hoopla and shenanigans. There's stuff that goes on out there in the alley. And we're in here doing our meditation time, and that's when the practice gets really important. Can you stay in the place of centered consciousness even when the motorcycle club have parked in your alley, my alley? The noises can get very loud in the world. So when we practice enough tapping into our place of silence, that means even when we're walking through the hoopla, the shenanigans, the carrying on, the running amok, that we walk in the present. We're not pulled down by it. Is this making sense? Yes. But if we're not practicing, then when it all hits the fan, then we're not ready because we haven't been practicing, right?
I got a question.
What's the question?
Is a swirling dervish, is he meditating or praising?
Swirling dervish. Yes, they're meditating.
Okay, I feel better now. Thank you.
What takes you to the silence? Do that. So here's a woman whose life I just respect so much. She's doing a lot of good in the world. I love her haircut, too. She looks like a wild woman of the woods. 2 decades ago, Susan Samard discovered that trees communicate. A lot of people knew that already. Susan Bowles, when she came back from Italy, down in her, she said, They're doing experiments over there. And Olivia was there too with her. The trees are singing. They put the electrodes. They can hear the sounds of the trees singing. The trees are communicating. And what this woman discovered is that there's a network. I just love this. There's a network of nutrients, lattice fungi that move under the ground in the soil, and they carry nutrients from one tree to another, or from the mother tree to the seedlings. They've traced it with radioactive isotopes. Here's what she calls it. You're going to love this. The trees talk to each other through an underground network of lattice fungi buried in the soil. She calls it the wide wood web. She calls it the wide wood web. Everybody say that. The wide wood web. Reminds me of, what was the cartoon character?
Elmer Fudd.
Elmer Fudd. Yeah, years ago, David and I were at a church in Oregon. He was doing one of his meditations, you know, where you go through the field of flowers, and it's all very sacred and lovely, and he said, just take a moment to stop and smell the fragrant flowers. I lost it on the front row. And then he tried to correct it, and he said, just take a moment to smell the fragrant flowers. Sometimes Elmer Fudge is not going to give up. So there's this communication system, this lattice work of fungi that works under the ground to carry nutrients from one tree to another. What she found out, she's from British Columbia, by the way, in forest ecology. She tested the theories about how trees communicate. She used radioactive carbon to measure the flow and sharing of carbon between individual trees. This is just one thing she found out. She discovered that birch and Douglas fir share carbon. Birch trees receive extra carbon from the Douglas firs when the birch tree loses its leaves. And the birch trees supply Douglas fir trees carbon when they're in the shade. Now, let's take a deep breath. Let's apply that to ourselves. If trees are doing it, then it seems like a signal. It seems like a clue that the forest is not healthy unless nutrients are allowed to move through the whole forest. And when nutrients are kept from certain trees, they will die, and in fact, it affects the entire forest. It seems that we're all connected, y'all. Symbiosis. Symbiosis. And it applies to human family and trees, the whole planet, the rivers, the oceans. Everything's health increases the health of everything else. And yet, we still continue to act like we're separate from our decisions and the consequences of our decisions. I think that's part of the definition of mental illness, I'm not sure. When we see the effect of our decisions on the planet and yet we keep making them. Is that insanity? It's insanity. So here we are, talking about silence in the forest floor. She discovered that the hub trees, or the mother trees, Jackie, this reminds me of the tree we did the long dance under out at Ladies Island. The mother trees, the largest trees in the forest, act as central hubs for vast below-ground mycorrhizal networks, fungi networks that send growth nutrients to seedlings within this network. The mother trees. So, what if there's a vast network of energetic connection between us, between all of life? What if the World Wide Web is a metaphor for how we are energetically connected and always were long before the internet was designed? It's another way to see how we're all connected. If you think your thoughts don't make a difference, you're living in an illusion.
Preach on.
Your thoughts affect me, and my thoughts affect you.
Yes.
My decisions, my responses in the world affect you, and vice versa. How long will it take us human beings to figure out that when one is hurt, the entire community is hurt? How long does it take us to figure that out? So let's take a deep breath. What does this have to do with unity? We're all comfortable here. We enjoy one another's company. We have great potlucks. We have great music. We have a sense of community. We're comfortable here. We 80 to 100 folk. Listen, I've had to go into a lot of silence to enter into the truth about what my next step is, really. And you, I'm sure, are called to do the same thing. How do we be in the world now? How do we be in the world now? And for those of you who've gotten to know me a little bit, you know that that by my true nature, I am an introvert. Isn't that funny? We've done the psychological test, right? The whole board did it. Carlotta and I are the two true introverts. We're surrounded by extroverts, thank God. But here's the scoop, and I feel like this applies to all of us. I've been spending a lot of time in prayer and silence, asking, what is my next step? And, as importantly, what is next step for this church community? Do we want to stay in our comfortable little space? We love this building. It's like an old shoe. We love it. It's comfortable. It's filled with healing energy. It's filled with the presence. People like Susan Bowles has helped fill this church with the presence. Olivia Rose with the healing services first Wednesday nights. The Reiki, the emotion code now, the classes, the workshops, people like Joe and Jenny who keep coming year after year. Bobby, who's been there almost from the beginning too. The music team shows up, mostly unpaid, y'all, to do what we're doing, that we're comfortable, we're happy, we're content. And I want to tell you, Spirit's calling me out. And I feel like Spirit's calling this church out.
Amen.
Yeah, it's not just about getting a new spanky clean location that doesn't have cigarette butts in the parking lot in front of the front door every Sunday. It's not just about having a church where we can meditate without the hoopla and carries on in the alley. It's not just about that. And I am not a minister who wants to have a 500-member church. I'm an introvert, y'all. But you know and I know, and you've had the experience, there's going to be times in our lives where Spirit calls us out and says, you can't sit this one out, you're going to have to stand up and be seen. You can't sit this one out, you're going to have to let your voice be heard. And as a community, that's what's happening too. We're not just going to sit this one out and say, well, whatever happens, happens. No, our spiritual work and call to spiritual practice is so vitally important right now for you, whether you ever step into this church again. But as a church community, we're being called out. Everybody take a deep breath. Is it okay to be called out?
Yeah.
Is it okay to let your light be seen? Is it okay to let your voice be heard for truth and sanity and peace and well-being? Is it okay to call for kindness and respectful dialogue between people even when they don't have the same beliefs? Is it a good idea to treat one another with respect? Then we're okay. We're going to be okay. We're moving through a time that maybe we haven't passed through in our lifetimes, but there are people who've passed through these hard places before us. There are people who've passed through hard places, and maybe not all of us have, but this is one of those times when you're not going to want to sit it out. And so Unity is one of those places, one of the organizations that you support that is asking what is ours to be in the community at this moment in this time. And so as a community, we do enter into silence. As a community, we do enter into prayer. As a community, we ask what is ours to do? What is ours to be? And you may be like me. You just soon be in the silence all the time and never leave your house. You know, you're comfortable. I'm comfortable. There are times when I don't want to leave my house for 3 or 4 days at a time. There are times I just want to stay still and quiet. And yet, Spirit's saying, get out there. It's like the wonderful Upham, Judith Upham. There's a lot to do. So get with it. One of the first things is to do our own spiritual practice enough that the time of uncertainty doesn't take us into new bits. Right? So let's take a deep breath. Close your eyes if that feels comfortable. We invite ourselves right now to let our minds float in the energy of our hearts. We don't know all the answers. We don't know all the right steps. We're open to knowing. We don't know all the right words to say at all times, but we're open to knowing the most healing words, the most transformative responses in the world at this time. We open to the spaciousness of being. We open to knowing our oneness with the one presence. And in a millisecond of true silence, we can remember who we are. In a millisecond, in the twinkling of an eye, we remember and know ourselves. In alignment with the one presence. We have all the solutions. We open to knowing how to implement them. In kindness and peace, compassion. And we say, so it is, and so we let it be. Namaste.